Welcome to today's CRM Magazine Roundtable web event, brought to you by Pitney Bowes, Teradata, and HP. I'm David Myron, Editorial Director of CRM Magazine, and I'll be the moderator for today's broadcast. Our presentation today is titled, Make Better Business Decisions with Predictive Analytics. Before we start, allow me to explain how you can participate in the live event. At the end of the broadcast, there will be a question and answer session. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box provided and click on the Submit button. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but if your question has not been answered during the show, you will receive an email response to it within a few days. Plus, if you'd like a copy of the presentation, you can download a PDF from the resource icon at the bottom of the console. Now, to introduce our speakers for today's event. Dr. Gerhard Heide is Director of Global Market Strategy at Pitney Bowes. David Perona is Chief Analytics Officer at Teradata Applications. And Deborah Ann Braun is the Practice Principal of Analytics and Data Management at HP Enterprise Services. To review the speakers' bios, please click on the speaker icon on the bottom of the console. So now, without further ado, let me now pass the event over to Dr. Gerhard Heide, Director of Global Market Strategy at Pitney Bowes. Welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you, David, and welcome from me to everybody who is on the webinar today. It's my pleasure to kick things off. So we are looking at predictive analytics in general, and I wanted to set the scene a little bit with a specific topic called Pragmatic Analytics. Now, what this means is kind of new approach to cope with a lot of the demands we are seeing now around the approaches with analytics, new data sources, how to set teams up differently, things to address, and in general, how can the analytics team work more efficiently with the rest of the business. As a background, there's a specific reason why we're looking at this, and just to make that point, it's all to do with customer experience or customer engagement. Forrester calls this the age of a customer, and essentially we are in a world where the customer is much more demanding, much more kind of in charge of how they interact with an organization. They know what they want, when they want it. They're using different channels. And in order to compete with that as a business, we need to be customer-centric or customer-obsessed, as Forrester calls it. And there's a good reason for doing that. So this chart shows that if you look at companies who are focusing strongly on customer experience and customer engagement, they vastly outperform companies who do not. So in the middle, you've got a 6-year stock average for S&P 500 index, and most companies, so kind of the average is 14.5% return. Customer experience leaders, by some measure, get triple the return on average, while companies who are not focused on that, customer experience laggards, are actually on average getting a negative return. So there's a clear-cut reason why a company should focus on customer experience and why this is relevant for the bottom line. Now, the link to analytics is essentially, analytics is one of the fundamental platforms in order to make that happen. So the first is data, and we talk a little bit about that later on today in this session. But we are having new data sources, we link them together, we bridge the gap, but essentially from a point of view of a customer, analytics allows us to understand the customer and allows us at the moment of interaction to make sure what is the right message to give to the customer, be that a customer-initiated interaction, be that a kind of communication we have initiated, taking into account what stage of the life cycle the customer is in, taking into account maybe where the customer is, what we know from his social media interactions, and so on. So here you've got a typical customer life cycle, and at various stages, different communications are more important, and including also maybe what the customer journey map is at the moment, what interactions the customer has had with other parts of the business. So it doesn't only include marketing, but but also includes operations, includes kind of billing, and so on. All of these need to work together to provide a good customer experience. And therefore, the kind of analytics is the brain behind which makes that work. Now, as another kind of outline, before we look into what I mean by pragmatic analytics, if you look at the kind of demand for analytics over the last 20, 30 years, there's a number of charts like this. So in the 1980s, 1990s, up to about 2000, it was steadily growing, and you had a number of very, very skilled statisticians, data analysts, or data scientists who kind of can create models, can understand the data, and provide the answers to interact with the customers. Now, at the same time, in the last 10 years, the demand for analytics has shot up exponentially. You can see the gap is widening and widening there. As we get more data sources, as we get more channels, as we get new ways of interacting with the customer, and as we generally find more things to analyze. And the key here is that in order to keep up with the demand for analytics, this gap here, it's important that we are looking slightly beyond maybe the traditional analytics methods. And one of the things which we find is key in order to doing this essentially is being pragmatic, using pragmatic analytics. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, this is one way of looking at it. So essentially, we are looking at, rather than getting a perfect answer or an exact answer in a week, what we want is a good enough answer now. So essentially, rather when looking at and getting into a lot of detail and getting the correct answer for a model or tweaking the model to the last few percent, looking at where are we now, what can we do quickly, how can we do how can we deploy this now? It's no use to us if the insight we derive cannot be used straight away. So there's no point doing analytics if I can't use it with the customer. And by the way, if you're looking at this quote here, John Tukey is a mathematician based in California who has also invented or coined the word bit, binary digit. And for me, that definition here is as good as any to describe what you mean by pragmatic analytics. If you follow a pragmatic analytics approach, just as a starting point, it covers a lot of things. Essentially everything you do, and as we've seen early on, we're looking at the whole customer life cycle. Pragmatic analytics can be applied almost everywhere. So we're looking at speeding things up, getting our answers quicker, using the answers in real time, deploying it on any channel the customer comes in. One of the key things is automating analytics. So if we have derived a model, if we have an answer, we don't want to do it again. What we want to do is reuse that as a new customer comes in or as new interaction happens. The model automatically needs to get updated with as little human interference as possible. One of the key things to do is actually asking the right question, a question which is much more relevant, and I've got an example for that in a moment. Likewise, looking at the context of where the customer is and bringing in different and new data sources across the organization. Now, looking at this across the piece, what can be gained for that? So this is a typical example of an industry study. If you're doing pragmatic analytics, it cuts down significantly on the time it takes for getting answers. So compared to a traditional approach, what we find is often the time to get an answer is cut down to a quarter or a third, depending on if it's an easy or a hard problem, and in many cases it's even quicker than that. And that is one of the key things. So if you look at around the industry, there's essentially no analytics department, no analytics team anywhere, at least in my experience, and hopefully in your experience too, which has spare capacity. So what you're trying to do is take away from the kind of maybe mundane questions, the mundane queries, and speed up the time which is spent on that, and let the data scientists, the statisticians, focus on the more difficult, more long-term pieces of insight. Now, I wanted to give a couple of examples what what we mean by this, how this approach can be applied, and different other things which can be used for pragmatic analytics. And I think the first one I wanted to highlight is essentially asking the right questions. Now, this is a map of the marketing spending in the last presidential election in the U.S. So what we had here, effectively, particularly with the Obama campaign, is this very sophisticated deployment of analytics and particularly asking the right questions. So first of all, what you do if you're thinking where do I spend my marketing money for my campaign, looking, okay, where does it make a difference? So first of all, you look at the swing states where if you tweak it a little bit, you might win. But beyond that, it's still a big question. Who do I target? And I have some voting preferences. Are people likely to vote for Obama, and are people likely to vote for Mitt Romney? And maybe some models, some propensity models behind that. What a traditional approach might be, okay, let's take a propensity model and let's target people who are voting for Mitt Romney at the moment and trying to get them to change their mind. What a much better question is, and what the Obama campaign has done to a lot of detail, is actually looking at, okay, which of the Mitt Romney voters will change their mind and vote Obama if I give them a call. Not just which ones are likely to change their mind, but which ones are likely to change their mind if they get a call. And that is a much more relevant question. And in fact, what this leads to, we have a kind of a segmentation of our population in the sense of, so a customer has a choice. They can either do what we want, buy or not buy, or they can't. We also have a choice. We can either contact the customer or we can leave them alone. Now, there is a group of people who, if we contact them, they do what we want. They vote Obama. But if we don't contact them, they wouldn't do that. They don't buy or they don't vote Obama. So these are persuadables. And clearly, if we can analyze who these people are and focus on them, that is a much more relevant question than looking at maybe a general whatever people like who are voting Mitt Romney in the first place. There are two kinds of populations who do not change their behavior if we contact them. One are the lost causes, who definitely will not do what we want, and I don't want to spend the effort contacting them because it's a wasted resource. And there are also the sure things who will definitely do what we want regardless if we contact them or not. And likewise, I do not want to contact them because it's a wasted resource, and I also might have made them an offer, maybe a cheaper deal, which I didn't need to, so that cost me additional money there. And paradoxically, there's also a group of people who kind of would have done what we wanted, would have bought, or would have stayed if you're looking at retention, but because we contacted them, actually it turned out that they looked around and went elsewhere, the sleeping dogs. Now, we don't want to contact them certainly because essentially here we're triggering actually negative behavior. And that's a very common phenomenon in some industries, for example, telco or insurance, as well as a couple of others, where people kind of wake up to the fact that they have maybe had a long-standing direct debit running here, or they wanted to look around for some time and look for a better deal somewhere else. So what we can do, if we ask the right question rather than finding out who is a sure thing or who is likely to change their behavior, focus on the persuadables, and both reduce the cost and have a much more efficient use of resources and analytics. And finally, before I hand over to my colleagues who will also, I think, give some examples along those lines, there's lots of different areas where pragmatic analytics can be applied, and here are just some examples. So as an example, there's lots of discussions around big data at the moment, lots of new data sources bringing silos together. One of the key things to realize is actually that big data is quite an overhyped buzzword, and in fact, what we might want to consider first is maybe using the term dark data, looking at the data we already have. And in a lot of organizations, there's a lot of data and a lot of information lying around which can be extracted quickly and efficiently if you have the right question to be used in our insight. There's a lot of discussions around context-based marketing, using the social information we have about a customer and the location information, as well as everything else, and sending messages to the customer based on their location and what we're doing at the moment. So if you have, for example, a mall or a store and the customer is in there, you can send offers based on the shop which is there. But there's, for example, a difference: is the customer walking away from a store or walking towards it? Because if the customer has already passed it, you do not want to send them a message again. So there's clearly a significant, the context can change very quickly. Likewise, you can take into account of the relationships the customer has with their peers. So nowadays a lot of customers are actually seeing their peers as experts. So people influence other people, and one of the information in certain industries you have is kind of how many people is the customer connected to, what's the relationship, and you get an influence score. That's another thing, which is a very quick answer in some cases if you can extract it and use it. So there's a lot of different areas where pragmatic analytics can be applied, but the key thing I'd like to mention is essentially, rather than spending a lot of time on detailed analytics, what we need to do in this new age of customer experience and customer engagement, where analytics can apply everywhere in lots of different communication interactions, is making sure we focus on doing things fast and efficiently, enabling more people to do analytics, so kind of a lot of self-service, automating results, and asking the right questions. And I think from what I've seen from my colleagues, some of the things we will see in the next half hour go along with a similar line, and it will be interesting to see what feedback and what kind of questions we have afterwards. So with that, David, I'd like to hand back to you, and thank you very much for listening.
All right, Gerhard, thank you very much for that. Now let's bring to the discussion David Perona, Chief Analytics Officer at Teradata Applications. Welcome to the broadcast, David.
Thank you, David, and hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to attend our webinar. So first of all, Teradata Applications and what I'm talking about today is really focused on marketers and really around empowering marketers and business users to connect with their customers through engaging customer experiences. As we heard Gerhard talk about earlier, he talked a lot about customer experience. Well, that is, an area in which you're talking about making better business decisions with predictive analytics. I mean, that is the area that a lot of people focus on. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So even today for customers, as they interact with your companies, right, they're generating lots of data. So as they interact with you via social, mobile, think of any of the digital channels, there is lots and lots of data. Right, so and even think about just the traditional channels of someone logging into your website or receiving an email or actually maybe responding to one of your emails that you'd send to your customers or even calling into a contact center, et cetera. All of those touch points, if you will, generate lots of data. And I hate to use the word big data, but that just really means it's just the volumes and amounts of data that your customers are generating are really enormous today. And, so how do we leverage that to really give customers a better experience? So you look at that slide and say, well, gee, that does look, it is a challenge for a customer to sort of, go from these different channels and have a consistent experience. Well, think of it from the marketer's or business user's perspective, right? So now I've got all these channels. I have all this data. Some of it's, big data or dark data. Some of it's the traditional data we might have in a warehouse. How do I use all that data to give an engaging customer experience? And that's, in my opinion, what the big challenge is. We can look at this slide and say I can go over each one of those little bubbles on there for the next 20 minutes, but I won't do that. You can thank me later. But if you look at that, there's, how do you, as a business user, take all that data and decide what is the best way to engage or not engage a customer? And really, the short answer to that is the use of analytics, right? As a business user, you can't be expected to map each data element to each customer, to each channel, and say, I'm going to present this offer to this customer, or I'm going to do this with this other customer. You need a way to sort of have some way to really interpret or extrapolate that data in a way that is at least easily consumable by a business user or a business itself. So looking at the left, kind of the bottom left of the slide, you start looking at things, on an analytical side, look at leveraging predictive and big data in real time to really determine, how do we interact with this customer, or what do we have to do with this customer to drive the most revenue or drive whatever your business objectives are. And that's really what I'm focusing on today is really using analytics to make the business decisions as quickly as possible. So thinking about insights and analytics, right? We can kind of think of it maybe in three buckets. I'm sure there's more buckets than this, but for today's discussion, we'll throw it into 3 buckets about customers. Number one, we want to try to integrate customer insights. So it's not good enough to look at individual silos of data about a customer. We need to bring together as much of it as we can, and maybe some of that's analytics, in order to engage the customer the right way. And so it's not good enough just to leave the contact center data where it lives, or it's not good enough to leave the big data from your mobile app in somewhere else and not try to tie them together. I think that's a worthy goal that we should have is to bring that together. Also, just bringing data or analytics about customers. So looking at analytics at the customer level, be it product affinity, profitability, channel preferences, et cetera, since we're obviously want to make decisions about customers and customer interactions. Well, I think it goes along that we need to have analytics at a customer level. And ultimately what we want to do is predict customer behavior with predictive analytics. And so that could be churn, campaign response, or even non-response. But that's really sort of the journey as we look at it. So really you want to take your insights and analytics to make decisions, right? And I'll just say that really one of the most important things that you need to do on projects like this is determine what is your objective, or maybe your predictive analytics objective or goal, right? Is it about generating revenue today? Is it about increasing customer satisfaction and loyalty? Is it about trying to prevent churn? Whatever that is, think about what your analytical goal is. You just can't go and say, gee, I'm going to use predictive analytics on this data and figure something out. You have to always start with the goal or the objective or the decision in mind before you start. And I think it's also good to explore new big data sources, not saying everything all at once, but now that you've chosen your objective or goals, maybe it makes sense to, gee, what if I knew what emails this customer had received today or had sent to us, or what he said when he talked to one of our call center agents. Look at new data sources that maybe traditionally you haven't used in real-time decisioning. Obviously, look at your conversations with your digital customers. Use in your decisioning real-time or contextual data. It's not good enough to use a model from last week and use some batch scores to somehow think about, well, gee, how do I treat a customer today? You really do need to sort of marry both worlds together at least, and using what is the context of the conversation with the customer, as well as any sort of predictive analytics that we might have. And then inject analytics into your decisions, right? I mean, you could make simple decisions of if the customer falls into this segment, do X or Y. You obviously could do that, but I think it's much more powerful where you use analytics to help make your decisioning to drive to whatever your objectives are. And really ask new questions. Don't just start. I mean, you always want to start out simple, but just don't accept the status quo for your project. So if you had an idea for maybe a new campaign, what if I knew this about a customer? Or what if I could tell that the customer was within 2 blocks of my store? What if I knew, just ask those questions and then look in your big data sources and try to incorporate that. And of course, in these projects, you need to test new hypotheses too. It's not just a one-shot, I pick the offer that generates the most revenue, but there might be other types of objectives you want to try. Maybe I want to present 2 offers on the home page when somebody logs in, or maybe you want to experiment by putting 15 on the right-hand side. Always look for other ways of engaging your customers and just continually test to try to get the best results. And in the end, my opinion of operationalizing predictive analytics, I think the challenges that you'll see in predictive is not actually building the best predictive model. What your biggest challenge is will be operationalizing your predictive analytics. So it's not, regardless of what others may say about, this model is perfect or this is, this works better than that as far as modeling. In the end, your biggest challenge is how do I operationalize it? Right? So I've got this model, great. Well, how do I use real-time data in that? How do the call center agents consume it? How do salespeople consume it? How do our digital marketing team use that for ad buying? So if you look at the slide, we've got all these little real-time interaction arrows, and that's really all those separate points, right, that you need to consider as far as projects, but also, how do I operationalize predictive? And I think that's really where, if you think about these projects, you really need to start with what is my objective, and ultimately, how am I really going to operationalize this? And start from the viewpoint of the interaction with the customer, not necessarily starting from the back end where you have a data warehouse or you have some other offline data sources, but really start from the front of the office and move your way back. So just advice that I would give in these types of engagements, start with a decision in mind. I wouldn't necessarily start with predictive analytics in mind, but what is the decision you need to make? Look at using analytics to simplify the business user's experience, right? So maybe you want to predict likelihood to accept and churn rather than having to understand the underlying raw data that for a business user they're just not going to be able to understand as well. Leverage contextual or customer behavioral data in real time, and then test different approaches to analytics to really optimize to try to really optimize the results. So at the end, that's the advice I give. It's always good to start focusing on your customer engagement, focusing on the marketer and customer experience, and then pick an area that you want to start in first. Right? Pick the one point of interaction and work there, and then slowly work your way out. So that's all I had. Back to you, David.
All right, great, David. Thank you for that. Now I'd like to introduce Deborah Ann Braun, Practice Principal of Analytics and Data Management at HP Enterprise Services. Welcome to the broadcast, Deborah Ann.
Thank you so much, David. It's a pleasure to be here. My two previous presenters did a great job of setting the stage for why we do predictive analytics. And today, I'd like to talk about some best practices for building a data science community. When we talk about creating a dynamic data science competency center or team, I'm always reminded of the quote on this slide, that a mere 2 years ago, the industry began to recognize that data science was not only coming into the IT mainstream, but was so boastful that it was called the sexiest job of the new millennium. The term data scientist was originally coined back in 2008 by DJ Patel and Jeff Hammerbacher, and today, no matter who you talk to in the IT community, it is a topic that generates a tremendous amount of interest. Who are these mysterious data scientists? Where did they come from? Where have they been? And how can I get that job? Are the common questions that we hear today. We recognize that data science is essential to making huge advances in challenges from customer sentiment, fraud prevention, image recognition, and threat detection. But again, we ask ourselves the basic question. Who are these mysterious data scientists? Today we know that the most effective data science teams are teams of people who work closely together to share and learn from industry experts, to gain knowledge in the application of data science. Their goal is simple. It's to solve your key business challenges. Until very recently, no university degree programs existed in data science, data mining, and apprenticeships have been the natural path for becoming fluent in the diverse technologies of things like statistics and computer science, really being able to unlock the door to core business understanding. We see that these teams have been made up of individuals from very specialized disciplines, from engineering to computer science. But one thing has always been true, that they have a love and a passion for data. Whether they are a data engineer turned mad scientist, or a BA who mined their way into data stardom, or even an actuary who's crossed over into the big data pool. In essence, the development of an effective, vibrant, and growing data science community requires an understanding of and attention to 4 key dimensions: establishing a data science competency area, what are the fundamentals of data science roles, having a great data science training curriculum, and developing and supporting data science outreach and community. So I'd like to start off talking a little bit about data science competency. The successful application of data science is really tied to how well the discipline becomes integrated into the context and deployed into your operations. This is done by taking a multidisciplinary approach to data science, which includes competencies in the area of business analysis, which is really to identify meaningful insights from data that can be put into action to achieve your organizational goals. Data management, with the advent of highly scalable distributed file systems, columnar stores of data, streaming data sources, and in-memory data systems, the ability to integrate analytic techniques, technologies, and methodologies to handle new data environments becomes very critical. The analytic technology and technique component is really key to ensuring that you have a well-versed set of team members that can understand continuous changes in both technology and techniques for data science. We have analytic deployment, which is the delivery capability of ensuring you have a 360-degree solution, including the deployment and operationalization of analytic models to provide continuous improvements in learning. And finally, data output and visualization. This is one of the most important because it ensures that you have an ability to create visual representation of the data. It removes the communication barrier between the technical professional and the business users that they support. Now, let's talk a little bit about the characteristics of a data science team. Characteristics of the roles that make up data science or an analytics team are really key, that they are looking for individuals and identifying traits in individuals of who makes a good team member. Some of the basic qualities that you would look for are individuals with deep technical expertise, with an innate curiosity in data discovery or data mining, looking for individuals who really understand ways to distill data into appropriate hypotheses in which to test against. And one of the most important, have the ability to be a very good storyteller. Typically, these individuals require a background in computer science, but many of the top data science team candidates we see today come from different disciplines, all with a strong technical background, which really provides unity across these individuals, and all have an innate ability to work large amounts of data quickly and visualize where the problem leads them. With the top of the spear represented by the data scientists you see here, they are supported by analytic solution architects, DBAs, analytic data analysts and modelers, and building the foundation with data transport and visualization engineers and developers. This really rounds out the core roles recommended for any data science team. While these roles can be combined and overlapped, they represent the minimum needed to support your data science or analytics team. Now we'll talk a little bit about training curriculum. So I hear this question asked a lot. I want to be a new or a better data scientist, but working through online courses alone, it's just not working for me. The key to successful training curriculum for your data science team really includes a wide variety of instructional methods. You're looking at using things such as interactive lectures, videos, books, or even team projects. These projects can be employed to build up the strength and the effectiveness of a new team of analysts. Core concepts must be mastered, and some amount of classroom instruction can convey the ideas on simple versions of real problems. But as early and as often as possible, the technical concepts that you share and the methods that they use really need to be grounded in the team's analytic toolkit by using them on projects of actual interest to the individual and the organization. This guidance and mentoring helps to ensure that exercises with known outcomes are utilized as instructional stepping stones to ensure essential data challenges are experienced and mastered, and that's very key. But they should also then learn that some of the actual business problems faced by your organization require a deeper dive into problem definition, data exploration, and model building. This has proven one of the most valuable ways to lock in the sometimes subtle concepts that separate the most effective data scientists from merely your average technical staff. Training and community are very important, and community outreach really works hand in hand with this. As data scientists are in great demand, we all know where to find outreach, and community is going to become a critical aspect of supporting your data science team. The best data scientists are motivated by a combination of challenging and interesting projects, having excellent peers, and a healthy workspace and culture, which includes clear community or center of expertise supporting advanced analytics. Good data scientists are known for their curiosity and tenacity, and we hear that quite a bit. So continual learning from these individuals who are very tenacious on learning and understanding data provides a great opportunity to share successes and failures, which motivates their peers. This slide that you're looking at outlines some examples of online communities that I think are really key, such as Predictive Analytics World, KD Nuggets, and Data Science Central. An additional opportunity for consideration would be to host an internal conference, and these are always great. Pulling keynote speakers and workshop leaders from within your organization, which can really help to expose existing and upcoming talent, which can support your data science team. In summary, key success factors for building a successful data science team focus on a few things. Identify key individuals with the basic skills, desire, and willingness to deep dive into data head on. Identifying the right mix of roles necessary to meet your organization's analytic needs. Ensuring you have a strategy to develop training and competency centers focusing on data science. And to develop keen interest in your data science practice through community sharing. And I wanted to add in a couple things to really look out for. University grads with data science certification, while we're very much looking forward to seeing this great group of educated folks coming into the workforce, be careful that we're looking at maybe 3 to 5 years of applicable experience before truly naming them data scientists. There's a lot of learning that goes into the application of data science in order to get the results that you're seeking. And data science itself is in a state of major change at this time. These teams must stay current on industry and technology changes to ensure that their strategy, the methodology, and delivery can continue to provide you the world-class results that you're looking for. Hope that this information has been both helpful and informative. Thank you. Back to you, David.
All right, Deborah Ann, thank you for that. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their presentations. Now what I'd like to do is go into our Q&A session. I do have a few questions for our presenters, but I would also like to remind our viewers that if you have a question for any of our presenters, just type it into the question box provided and click on the Submit button. As I mentioned earlier, we'll try to get to as many questions as possible, but if your question has not been selected during the show, someone will respond to it within a few days. All right, great. So my first question is for Deborah Ann. What's the biggest risk to a company tackling analytics projects without a proper data science community in place?
That's a great question. I think one of the greatest risks in the lack of a working data science community, for example, would be some factors which drive data scientists to become frustrated when the organization doesn't really ensure that they have a cohesive strategy And you find that these siloed groups within the organization that are producing analytics, that while they're producing key results, they're not aligned to the critical path of the business, and you end up with a lack of adoption or your ability to really capitalize on that talent.
All right, thanks for that. Another question for you, Deborah Ann. Do you think that data science is just a temporary hyped-up item, or will this likely stay hot in the future?
Well, I definitely believe that data science and the practice of analytics is here to stay, and it's going to continue to be a hot topic for quite some time. While I wish I could, but I can't predict the future, what I can say is that there always has been and always will be a need for data analytics in some form or fashion. And as long as we continue to find value in mining the data, I think data science will be here to support those needs for as long as we need it.
All right, great. Thank you for those. Let's pull Gerhard into the discussion. Gerhard, how would you go about establishing a pragmatic analytics practice?
Okay, thanks, David. So the key is essentially to have all the parts of the business working together. So as Deborah Ann just said, there's always a need for analytics, and that will carry on, but it has to be within the business. So one of the main elements I see is having the analytics community working very closely with all the other parts of the business which use analytics. So maybe having joint sessions, having them define the priorities together. At the same time, we need to look very closely at what queries or what questions or what insight can actually be done by the users themselves. So looking a lot at self-service, so where you have a lot of data scientists spend most of the time doing mundane queries. It's quite possible that a lot of these could be done by people who are not the analysts themselves, depending on the level it is. That way, the answers can be derived a lot quicker. They might also be more relevant because the person who is asking questions can also answer it, and the knowledge across the data is shared throughout the team. So it's not always possible, but in some of the very simple questions, we've seen a lot of mileage in actually kind of sharing the simple questions, and that way enabling the whole team to work better. So it's essentially trying to function as one whole operation across the business.
All right, thanks for that. Another question for you, Gerhard. When finding the persuadables, could you explain the difference between traditional analytics versus uplift?
Yeah, so the example, I went through this example of what the Obama campaign did as one example of asking the right question and how you go about it. So what you do is in a traditional way, what you have, say, you have a product to sell. Traditionally, what you do is you have a propensity model, or the standard ways, you analyze which customers are likely to buy that product. And that's what all of us do, what a lot of analytics is about, and that's very important with a kind of key insights. And when you select the top people who from your model and use them maybe as part of a campaign or a communication or as a message in real time if they come in, and that's fine, and that has some benefit. But it isn't. The difference there is it's not actually the right question about what you're doing. What you're looking at is you are trying to execute an action, which is sending a communication or making a call or anything like that. What you really want to know is who is likely to buy if and only if they are being contacted by me. So that's a very different, slightly different question, but vastly more appropriate for that situation. So it's a whole area. It's called uplift or true lift modeling, and I just gave this as an example for one of the ways how you can be more pragmatic by having more relevant questions. If you want to know more about it, by all means, we're happy to talk about it in more detail, or you can also do some online reading about it. It's called uplift modeling.
All right, great. Thank you for that. I'd like to pull David into the discussion now. David, there's a question here from one of our readers, which reads, are interactions being used for predictive analytics?
Yes. It's that you have to, so it depends how you define interactions as well. And I would term interactions as using both your offline data, but also what is happening in session or in real time. So that that data together is used in predictive analytics. So as an example, maybe if someone's on your website and just browsed product X in the session, well, if you take that into account, all of a sudden you think, well, gee, he's browsed that product. Maybe he's more likely now to buy, products in that maybe product category. And so, and if you didn't use that in session, then you still might have just kind of an offline view of the world. Maybe you're trying to push another product that you thought he was interested in. So, as you interact with customers, you should be able to, track all that information, not just your offline data, and create predictive analytics based upon, on that data set at least. So the short answer is yes, interactions are used in predictive analytics.
All right, great. Thank you for that. Gerhard, there's a question here for you. How would you answer the question of determining what is the minimum level of investment required to improve customer experience by X percent? We assume that improving the customer experience has an impact at some point on revenue, but how can we quantify this?
Okay, that's an excellent question. So this is going back to the initial chart I showed around, but we are not doing this for the love of it, but we are trying to get more money, and the way to get more money at the moment is to improve customer experience or customer engagement. Now, you could, of course, argue, first of all, how do I know that it's the customer experience which is causing that? It could just be a kind of a correlative effect where I can see that that companies who do more customer experience perform better. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of research going into it which shows that if I focus on customer experience, I get better results. But the really key thing in terms of trying to find out how much can I get, apart from looking at what other people have received, is it's not a project. So you're not doing a project for this year. We are doing customer experience and customer engagement. What you're looking for as an organization is a culture change, kind of a real focus on everything you do on the customer. And Forrester calls it customer obsession. So it means every interaction the organization as a whole has with customers needs to look at how does it affect my overall relationship, and it's essentially taking a long-term view of the customer. That doesn't mean actually always pushing sales or anything like that. It's much more having a holistic view and looking what can be done with it. There's a lot of literature which is quite interesting reading, I think. Particularly, I like to recommend the book Outside In by Forrester. I think authors are called Manning and Bodin. So if anybody is interested in learning more about this, that's a good starting point as much as anything.
All right, David, do you care to comment on that?
Yeah, it's really hard to give a blanket answer to the question, because part of that is to determine how well is your company today handling customer experience, and then to say how much lift or percentage uplift in revenue. It's hard to know until you know what your baseline is, and then how are you going to change or improve your customer experience? Is it by doing a couple small things, or is it really going to be a cultural shift for your entire company? So it's very hard to go and sort of give a blanket answer. If I look at projects that are, to say, smaller, departmental level projects, normally, and I can't give how much it would cost, but normally, it depends upon industry as well. But normally you can see an uplift on a short-term project, let's say in revenue or something, of around 5 or 10% for a given channel is pretty typical. But that's focusing more of simplistic engagements, simpler engagements focused on a single objective for a single channel. Hopefully it helps some.
All right, great. Thanks, David. Another question for you, David. What are some of the gotchas in a project like this?
In my experience, the biggest challenge by far in any of this is really, and obviously I have a slide on operationalizing predictive analytics, but it's also getting whatever channel whatever the channel is that you're integrating this into, is really getting their buy-in and acceptance and usage of your analytics. So just because you've deployed this great new, scoring engine to your website, if the digital marketers aren't going to use it, then it's all for naught, or it really doesn't align well with their roles or their needs or their KPIs, right? And then it's for naught. And you could use the same analogy for the call center or the retail stores, right? It's always about trying to get the channel to accept and consume and use that more than anything else.
Great, thank you for that. I'd like to pull Deborah Ann into the discussion. Sorry, it looks like Gerhard would like to add something to this very briefly. Gerhard, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And I'd like to reinforce one of the points David just made. It has to do with the culture of organization. And there's a rule of thumb which actually says if you get a new tool or anything like this, you should spend at least as much on kind of getting that accepted as you do on the tool, maybe even more so, depending on how wide-reaching that is. But that's worth bearing in mind with all of that. But the tools are exciting and great, but a lot of it depends on your focus and how you go about making sure that it's being used.
All right, great. Thanks for that. Let's bring Deborah Ann back into the discussion. Deborah Ann, there's a question here for you, which is, who are you seeing as the most usual advocates and business sponsors on building a data science community within an organization?
That's a great question. I think it varies depending on a couple of different factors. We see that primarily the greatest advocates for this type of community are going to be your executives, both in IT and the business. And because analytics requires the business and IT to work very closely together, those strategies and the advocation of building community comes as a group effort more than not. And from an IT perspective, IT executives recognize the need to ensure that this team has the ability to share information on a broader scale. On the business side, they're really looking to build this community so that the findings can be shared out with the business, and as new technologies and capabilities become available, that data science team is able to take advantage of those, which ultimately ends up in those business successes.
Deborah Ann, there's another question here for you. When you describe the team, the ideal team for your data science community, you included a lot of technical talent. Does it make sense to include someone from the business side who has a strategic or tactical use of the data?
I don't think I'm alone in my feeling on this, but I honestly, when I talk about data science team, I don't differentiate between IT and the business. So one of the roles that you saw on the slide I shared was, for example, an analytic data analyst. While I'm not talking about a traditional IT role, we see more and more from an analytics standpoint that business users become some of the best candidates for a data science team. We employ business users into that data analyst role. They know the data better than anyone. And we often also see that business users fit into that data scientist role. Many business users, again, depending on the industry, really qualify as statisticians or want to get their hands in on using different technologies to do analytics themselves. So while on the surface, it may appear that the roles that I shared were IT in nature, in all actuality, I would look at filling those roles with a combination of IT and business, where you have business and technology sharing going on.
All right, and another question for you. How critical is the concept of a data discovery experience to have a successful data scientist project?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think it's very important. So whenever you're getting into any type of analytics project, the core is really understanding the data and making sure that you have the right data to address the use case or the business problem for which you want to do analytics against. And more times than not, it requires you to do some initial mining of the data. All of the best analytic methodologies that are available today all start with business understanding and understanding your data and analyzing and mining that data so that you understand what your next steps are going to be and the focus area of your analytics will be to perform. So I do think it's a critical path item with regards to this work.
Thank you, Deborah Ann. Gerhard, in your example of the presidential election and in business in general, how do you determine the persuadables?
Okay, yes, so that's getting a bit specific, but what you do is essentially, so what, as I described, you're looking at finding out what the effect of an action is I'm trying to do. So which is, I'm calling somebody, and as a result of it, I want to check, does the person change their behavior as a result of the call? In order to do this successfully, I have to do it a few times and essentially measure what has happened. So I have a test group, and I call them, and I also have a group of people as a control group, and I compare with two groups, and I model the difference. So in a nutshell, that's how you approach that.
Another question for you, Gerhard. Do you have any hint or idea on how to formulate the right question?
So there's to some extent that is down to experience, but there are some examples, especially the kind of persuadability we just talked about for a bit, where there's a lot of kind of information around what you can do, and also some experiences which you can draw on how to approach that. In general, it's you need to take a good look at what you're using analytics for at the moment, really writing down what questions you're trying to answer, kind of, so what am I trying to achieve with, and then having a kind of think about, does the answers I'm getting, do they give me the right information? Is it maybe something where I can, if I tweak a question or look at something else, I can get some more detailed information. It's not a very detailed answer, but so to some extent it is down to experience. But that's a good first step, is kind of sitting down and really listing up what are we trying to achieve with our analytics, what are the kind of questions we have at the moment, and do I get the right answer, or where is there maybe a gap, and then focus on those. All
right, great. Thank you for that. We're approaching the top of the hour now, and I would like to close out by combining two questions together and getting feedback from all three panelists. And here's the combined question. What are the prerequisites for creating a successful predictive analytics effort, and what might be the first step for a company to begin down the path of benefiting from this strategy? Let's start with David.
Yeah, so the first thing I would look at for predictive analytics is look for a business problem or goal, right? So what is the decision that you want to make? I want to be able to sell to my customers more. I want to retain my customers better. Start with that, and then we'll look and see if you have the data to support it. But really, it is just focus on the business goal or need, and look and make sure it's enough of generates business value, and then we'll see if you have the infrastructure to support it. But normally you would.
Deborah Ann, anything to add?
I agree with what David said. I think that when we see teams wanting to start doing predictive analytics, they tend to have about 100 different questions that they want to ask. And really being able to focus your attention on some of the most critical areas, I think, is important, and also ensuring that you've got great alignment between IT and the line of business so that you can really do a great job of solving those problems.
And finally, Gerhard?
Yeah, so I agree with what David and Deborah Ann said as well. The main point to look for is it's bringing the business and the analytics team together. So it's looking for the problems, but also making sure they physically they communicate, maybe spend time together, are closely aligned and working together rather than being isolated and maybe interacting only every now and then. So if you can get them, actually it's a joint team, business analytics, then that's much more effective and you have a much better chance of hitting the ground running.
Great, thank you for that. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today. We apologize that we were unable to answer all of the questions, but as I stated earlier, all questions will be answered via email. I'd like to thank our speakers today, Dr. Gerhard Heide, Director of Global Market Strategy at Pitney Bowes, David Perona, Chief Analytics Officer at Teradata Applications, and Deborah Ann Braun, Practice Principal of Analytics and Data Management at HP Enterprise Services. If you would like a copy of this presentation, you can download it once the event is archived. If you'd like to review this event or send it to a colleague, please use the same web address that you used for today's event. It will be archived for 90 days. Plus, as a courtesy, you will receive an email tomorrow with the web address to view the archive. And just for participating in today's event, you can win this Apple TV. The winner will be announced on October 31st. Please go to www.destinationcrm.com to see if you're the winner. This concludes our broadcast. Thank you for joining us.